Welcome to the Generational Edge podcast, where we talk about the hard things. We say the quiet part out loud, and we help you to start figuring out how we can start to bridge the gap to increase productivity and really just start getting along in the workplace and in our lives. So here's the issue. Let's be real. So, half of the workplace chaos that we've been experiencing is just people fighting for control that nobody actually has anyway, right? Where boomers are looking for the predictability. They want to be able to anticipate their workload, the how it is that they're going to work with one another. Gen X actually just wants to be left the hell alone, right? To do what they do best. They've been in charge of doing lots of things. They work very well independently, and they don't like to be muffled or micromanaged. Millennials just actually want to be part of something. They are still building their careers. And so there's quite a long runway that they are considering how it is that they want to end their careers. And Gen Z just actually wants peace and boundaries. They're not trying to turn their job into the main focus of their life, but they're not trying to let it actually impact them, how it is that they feel about themselves and about the world as a whole altogether. These are all very conflicting, different views in the workplace. And this is why we have the friction that we do today. Companies are still running these workforces and these organizations like it's 2003. Listen, the playbook was outdated when Gen X got into the workplace. Hell, even when boomers got into the workplace. But we've been passing it down from generation to generation, thinking that nothing needed to change. Well, guess what? Now we're on this convergence of exploding technology, AI, and also to our social challenges that we're experiencing with even just within this country. All of this is conflating how it is that we're showing up in the workplace. If we think that our personal lives are not impacting our professional, then listen, I don't know what corner you've been hiding in, but this is in fact all of it is working together and causing the friction that we're experiencing today. So, how do we start to fix this? How do we start to show up differently? Not fully authentic, because you can't be your full authentic self in every environment and expect everyone to just accept that. But there is a way for us to be more collaborative, more understanding and tolerant of one another, that also too is going to be able to build community rather than building up those barriers that we've been so used to over the decades, over the generations of existing in the workplace. Now, listen, if you don't believe me, take it from Gallup. Gallup did a study, actually released it in 2025, that 32% of US employees are actually actively disengaged. And this disengagement is actually costing US companies about $2 trillion in lost productivity, right? And the greatest decline that we're seeing that in our emerging talent with the millennials and the Gen Zers. This means that those who are going to be retiring, when boomers and Gen X start moving into retirement, who are you going to have to replace some of those leadership roles, to replace some of those key critical roles? Now is the time to start thinking about this. Now is the time to start leaning into your culture, leaning intentionally into the people who are going to be taking over the reins. Now, here's what I've learned after years of watching these generations collide, is that we actually are all speaking the same language, but the foundation of our values, in which how it is that we're approaching one another, or we're approaching conflict resolution, how we're approaching change management, how we're approaching leadership in the workforce, all of this is very different. The foundational values that's shaping how it is that we show up, that is what's different across the generations. So we might as well be speaking different dialects because we are not understanding one another. Let me give you a good example. So a Gen X leader might say, we just need accountability, right? What they actually mean is that we need someone who is going to take the reins and see it all the way through execution, no matter what comes up along the way, because nothing is ever perfectly executed. There are always challenges that you don't anticipate that we experience. And so Gen X is saying here, well, listen, we need you to be fully accountable for seeing this all the way through the finish line. You can't drop it midway. Now, for example, what Gen Z might hear. when you say we need accountability, is there they may be hearing, and even some millennials might be hearing because of experience, is you're just looking for someone to blame when this doesn't go right. Right? When this actually starts to hit the fan, you're just looking for someone who's going to be a scapegoat for you at the end. And that sounds like a big no for me. So, my job in this work, in the generational edge, is to try to help you to translate between what is said and what is actually mean. Something that helps to build trust rather than those barriers. Each week, we're going to talk about control and how this is actually disengaging your teams, right? This micromanagement, this feeling of I have to hold on to every aspect of this and manage it through every phase. Otherwise, it's going to get broken. This understanding of how do we, the communication mishaps, how that's actually impacting your productivity. So when you're saying one thing, but you mean another, you're leaving too much open for interpretation, right? And so that's what's causing some of the breakdowns in your productivity. How these culture gaps are often overlooked and completely dismissed, right? So in culture is intentional. It's the tolerance of the behaviors, it's the influence of the behaviors, it's the continued perpetuation of behaviors that we continue to see in our environments. So, how can we start to take action and stop overlooking the bad behaviors, start improving or shining a light on the good behaviors, the things that we want to see, right? Instead of dismissing things that we may not understand and start to actually lean into it and ask questions so we can support and have a more intentional culture. We're also going to be talking about the unspoken generational dynamics that are absolutely driving your people out the door. When people are not speaking the same language, the same dialect, when they are not coming from the same foundation of values and they just don't understand one another, they are absolutely going to leave. Some generations are more resilient and they're just used to dealing with things more than others, while some maybe emerging talent, especially those who might be new to your organization, are absolutely not going to tolerate certain behaviors. So, how do we make sure that we are recognizing what is important to your staff as a whole, to all of your workforce, to make sure they can show up in their best self? Make sure you can be the leaders that are supporting the intentional culture that's going to drive your productivity. Now, there are going to be some episodes like this where you're just solo with me, and I am giving my sassy, spicy, side-eyeing exennial or zennial opinions and calling out as I see it, right? Based on my experience, I'm going to be sharing with you what I've noticed over the 25 years of my career and how I'm helping other leaders just like you to navigate some of these similar minefields. And other times, I'm going to be bringing in some really powerhouse guests that are either in the HR or the DEI space or the leadership space that are actually going to help to pour into you. How can you start to show up and be the best leader that you can and individual contributor in your roles? Right. So, we're going to have real talk. We're going to provide tools and show you how to show up differently and to be more intentional in this space. This is, after all, about how do we create the generational edge to make you the best leader, the best individual contributor in your environment throughout your career. And each week, we're also too going to dive into something that I like to call the decoding the generations. So, this is where we start to explore a word or a phrase that is causing some friction in the workplace. So, as an example, let's dive into one today. Today, we're going to talk about decoding the word that most people are absolutely getting this wrong and they're showing up very differently. And this is being weaponized in the corporate environment today, right? It's causing more tension than Slack notifications after 6 p.m. on a Friday. It's respect. And every generation views respect very differently. For example, boomers equate respect with tenure, right? With time and effort that has been committed to either an organization, either to a field of study, to a specialty. The hierarchy, that there is a pecking order, there is a chain of command that exists that they are going to follow, right? Instead of leapfrogging over leadership or over one another, they're going to support the hierarchy in getting things done. They also too believe in paying your dues, right? Earning the achievements and the accolades and promotions. So think of this as their approach as I earned my time or I earned my seat at the table. You can't skip the line just because you have learned some fancy new tool, right? So that's kind of the sentiment. And I don't mean to say that flippantly, but that's kind of the sentiment to how it is that they're approaching the workforce. For Gen X, respect means autonomy. You heard me say earlier, it's just about being left alone, left to their own devices, and to be trusted that they are competent to be able to deliver, to be able to execute, that you're not going to question them. That's when they start to tighten the reins and honestly to check out, to disengage. Because if you are micromanaging them, they're going to feel like you don't trust them and you don't trust them to execute. So they'll actually start to pull back. Think of it as listen, you need to trust me to do my job and not to micromanage me because this is either something I've been doing for quite some time, have great amount of experience in. Everyone has the opportunity to grow, but Gen X absolutely wants to be left to be the experts that they are and the specialty that they exist in. Next, millennials view respect as from a position of inclusion and being heard. They want to be part of the contributing factors to making decisions, to being part of something bigger. They want to feel included, that their voice is being heard, like they're not being dismissed, that they're being invited to the table to weigh in. Even if they don't have the decision making power, that's not the point. It's the value in their contribution. That's what they're looking for. Think of it as listen, if you want me to be part of the team that's running this ball up the field, you've got to have my buy-in. In order to get my buy-in, you've got to include me earlier on in these conversations, right? Don't just throw it to them and think that they're going to just run it up the field with the same urgency that you might if because you've been part of the decision-making process from the beginning, right? And Gen Z, they associate respect with the environment psychological safety, that they feel that they can be themselves in work. And I'm not talking about your full authentic self because we all have to compartmentalize to some extent. But they also too want to know that they can establish and reinforce boundaries. The best way to do this is to demonstrate those boundaries as a leader, to demonstrate your own boundaries, right? If it's not checking emails after a certain time period, or if it's being on PTO and actually taking your PTO and not responding to messages and things of that nature. They need to know that they have the psychological safety to exist in that space and to reinforce the boundaries that are important to them as well. Think of it as if I don't feel safe, then listen, I'm not going to perform, right? They're not going to let their guard down, right? Think of it as if you have pets, right? When dogs sleep on their backs, they feel fully rested. They feel fully safe and vulnerable. And so that means that you've created that psychological safety for them. So what does that look like for your team? Now, most leaders think that they're showing respect, but your teams need to hear it. They need to see it in your actions because they're not feeling like they are being respected. And that's where there's a big disconnect. The gap is not in this effort, it's in the definition. It's in how it is that we are approaching and defining what it is that we're hearing. It's in the interpretation of the actions that we're seeing and the alignment with the words or the misalignment with the words that we're hearing. So, next time, before you try to correct a behavior, either yourself or with your team, ask, be the leader that leans in and ask for the clarity and say, what does respect look like to you? Right? If that's the term, if that's the word that you're using, that respect, I'm not feeling respected or appreciated or acknowledged in this environment, ask them the question. What does respect look like to you? Let them define it. You're going to find that this is going to be different across your teams. Now, listen, chaos at work is not random. It's actually generational. And as we were talking, this is how the chaos starts to develop. That is because we are speaking the same language, but we are interpreting it in different ways. We're using different dialects. We're approaching different scenarios with the value system that's not quite aligned, right? We've inherited these structures for decades, and we continue to pass down the same playbook. And that playbook has absolutely changed. It is, or it hasn't changed, it has not evolved with the times. The times are demanding that we start to show up very differently as leaders. It's time to rewrite it. Time to rewrite that playbook and start creating new rules for our workplace so we can all show up and be successful. And that's what we're going to do each week. One episode, one conversation, and one generational misunderstanding at a time. This is how we start to do the work that is necessary to get us to the future that we all deserve. Now, you've been listening to the Generational Edge podcast with Kristina Green, and I am Kristina Green, your generational translator. If today's episode has helped you to understand that chaos is not random and it's actually generational, then congratulations. You are already light years ahead of most leaders in this space. But now it's your turn. Share this episode with your work bestie. Subscribe to this channel, to this podcast, because we're going to be diving into some of these things that are hard to talk about. But we're going to say the quiet part out loud because it does us no good if we don't have honest conversations, right? And second, I want you to cancel some unnecessary meeting. Believe me, people will notice and they will thank you, right? There's nothing like earning some good morale or some good points with others by canceling a meeting that actually should just be an email, right? And then lastly, please stop babysitting your adults, right? Regardless of what generation they are, nobody likes to be hovered over, to be micromanaged, and or to be treated like we are not the professionals that we are. Raise the bar, start having higher expectations for one another to show up. And believe me, they will.